Welcome back to another SY3 Political Sociology screencast. And in this screencast we're going to revisit one of the themes that we looked at earlier in the course. We're going to revisit this theme of democracy. Now remember, there are two types of democracy. There's the pure version of democracy called direct democracy, where citizens take a direct part in the decision-making process. And then there's what we call indirect or representative democracy, where citizens elect representatives to make decisions on their behalf. And the UK is of course a representative democracy where we elect these people, called MPs, Members of Parliament, to take decisions on our behalf. And as you can probably tell from this particular image of British MPs, members of some social groups, such as the middle class, middle-aged, white men, are much more likely to become MPs. Whereas in contrast, women, black and Asian people, young people, people from working class backgrounds, people with disabilities are underrepresented amongst MPs. Now, most sociologists would argue that the underrepresentation of certain social groups is a problem with our system of representative democracy. And this is because the MPs who hold power and exercise it when making decisions on behalf of the population are not a representative cross-section of that population. So most sociologists would argue that you would get better policy, better decisions that were more sensitive to the needs of the whole population if members of parliament were a good cross-section of the types of people that you find within the British population as a whole. So one key social factor that unites a lot of politicians within the British political system is that they tend to come from relatively privileged backgrounds. So the 2010 cabinet that was appointed by David Cameron had a total of 23 millionaires in it. And although only 7% of the UK had been educated privately, in this first cabinet appointed by David Cameron, the figure was 53%. And 2/3 of MPs come from a professional background, and they are 4 times more likely to have attended private school than the rest of the population. And only 1 in 20 MPs comes from a manual working class background. And in his recent book, Chavs, Owen Jones argues that the political underrepresentation of people from working class backgrounds is one of the reasons that people from poorer backgrounds are often demonised by politicians. So they're often portrayed as being lazy, feckless and irresponsible. So what Owen Jones argues, if I just quote him from his book, is that MPs are largely disconnected from working class communities and cannot imagine anyone not sharing their middle class values and aspirations. They find it easy to explain working class problems as the consequences of personal behaviour, not the social structure of the country. Above all, negative stereotypes about the working class have found a sympathetic hearing from overwhelmingly middle-class politicians who have rarely mixed with people with less privileged backgrounds. MPs from ethnic minority backgrounds are also underrepresented within Britain's system of representative democracy. So as we can see here, approximately 12% of the UK population is non-white, but at the moment there are 28 non-white MPs. So that's only 4.3% of the 650 MPs that make up the House of Commons. So if the non-white population were represented proportionally, there would be not 28, but there would be 78 members of Parliament from minority ethnic backgrounds. So at present there is underrepresentation. So as we can see in this table, there has been progress since 1987. So there has been an increase in the number of MPs from non-white backgrounds, but it's still the case as we saw in the photo earlier, that overwhelmingly members of parliament are white. Now, the underrepresentation of women is a significant issue in most political systems around the world. So as of August 2012, a woman held the post of President or Prime Minister in just 18 countries. Now, within Britain, we've had one female Prime Minister, Margaret Thatcher, and since 1918, 366 women had been elected as members of Parliament in the House of Commons, and this represents just 7% of all MPs over this particular time period. And until 1997, women had never comprised more than 10% of all MPs, and until the 1980s actually the proportion had always been below 5%. The proportion rose to 18% during the 1997 general election, when 120 women were elected, and we've seen some slow but steady progress, reaching a figure of 143 women members of Parliament in 2010. And in this graph we can see the number of female MPs by political party, and we can see that for the Labour Party there was a dramatic increase in the number of female MPs elected in 1997, and this was due to the fact that Labour used all-women shortlists to select their candidates in half of all winnable seats in that election. And also in 2010, the leadership of the Conservative Party tried to encourage more candidates to be selected who were women. And the UK has the 15th highest proportion of women MPs out of the 27 countries within the European Union, and it's a long way behind some of the Scandinavian countries such as Sweden that have the highest proportion of women within European parliaments. Although interestingly, the country that has the highest proportion of women members of parliament is Rwanda in Central Africa. So although some progress has been made in improving the representation of women within the UK Parliament, groups like UK Feminista argue that there's still a lot of work to be done because women continue to be outnumbered 4-1 within the British Parliament. And the recently established Government Equalities Office has argued that an increase in the number of women elected would lead to a higher quality of decision making, reflecting the greater diversity of experience of those making the decisions. And there is some evidence from the newly devolved institutions, the Parliament in Scotland, the Assembly in Wales, that the relatively high number of women on those bodies has had a discernible impact on shaping their policy agendas. So in both the Scottish Parliament and the Welsh Assembly, women politicians have championed issues such as childcare, the social economy and equal pay.